Hello and welcome to the People's Bank of China's Gold Reserve update for the month of December and the year ended 2017. Well, the People's Bank of China was actually a net seller of gold in 2017. People's Bank of China sold about 7 tons of gold, almost 8 tons of gold in December, and the People's Bank of China has not added any gold to reserve since they were admitted to the special drawing rights in October 2016. Total People's Bank of China's gold reserves now stand at just under 1,835 tons. However, People's Bank of China's foreign reserves rose for the 11th month in a row in December up to 1.314 trillion. Keep in mind that the People's Bank of China's foreign reserves had been falling for a couple of years. In 2015, they fell 315 billion, and in 2016, they fell 320 billion. So the People's Bank of China has rebuilt the reserves in 2017, but not to the same level where they had been. At one point, they stood well over $4 trillion. People's Bank of China added 104 tons of gold in reserves in 2015 when they started reporting, and they added 60 tons in 2016 up until October when they stopped adding gold to the reserves. The total value of the People's Bank of China's gold at the end of November or December was about $75 billion. Keep in mind, gold demand in China remains very strong. Gold holdings in China remain very strong. We are talking about the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China's gold reserves. This does not mean there's not other gold held by other official Chinese entities like wholly owned banks by the People's Bank of China, other state-owned banks, state-owned enterprises, sovereign wealth funds, individuals, and so on. Just as the Royal Bank of India has just 557 tons of gold, that doesn't mean that there's not more gold in the country. It's just what the central bank has. Indeed, it is estimated that Indian individuals and temples hold between 18,000 and 22,000 tons. People, for whatever reason, often conflate and confuse the reporting of the People's Bank of China's gold holdings, insisting that, quote, China is lying. Possibly, it's not beyond the realm of Chinese reporting. However, I believe what they're reporting here, I know what they're reporting here, is what's on the People's Bank of China's balance sheet. If they want to, quote, hide gold, it's not that they don't report gold that's held by the People's Bank of China. They just don't hold it at the People's Bank of China. So let's take a look at the People's Bank of China's gold holdings. You can see, first of all, People's Bank of China did not report any gold holdings from 2009 to 2015. And I suppose as part of their new transparency, in order to get themselves into the IMF's special drawing rights basket, they started to report with more transparency. And they did a catch-up report in June of 2015 showing that their gold reserves had increased from 1,054 tons all the way up to about 1,700 tons. And what happened there, people thought, they were shocked, they were surprised, they thought, wow, they only added 600 and some odd tons during that time period where they weren't reporting. But again, I think it's become clear to people that it's not that China hasn't added that much gold, it's just that the People's Bank of China only added that much. Now keep in mind, might as well skip ahead to the overall holdings of central banks. And a lot of people, they take these charts with a grain of salt, and I suppose that's okay. These are what central banks report, and so people say they have an incentive to make up stories, to lie, and so on. There's people who insist the United States has no gold, as if it's a fact. They've just heard it so many times on YouTube that they insist that the United States has no gold and that China has more. These numbers, though, they are the central bank numbers. This Russia's central bank, see, is almost going to catch, and probably will catch China, the People's Bank of China, probably in their next report, probably the report they release this month, unless they didn't add any gold in December, which is possible. But we'll see I mean, in January, which is possible. We did do the final year end, and Russia did add 223 tons of gold to get them to this 1,838 ton number. So they probably will add, they generally do add gold in January. So they probably will surpass China, if not in this coming report, which will represent January when they report later in February, or definitely by March when they report February's numbers, unless China starts reporting more gold additions. So you can take a look at this chart at your leisure on the Small Gold site. It's updated when and as I get a report of a country adding gold. Now, let's look at Chinese foreign reserves. This shows you pretty clearly this sloping line up, almost like a bubble, shows the Chinese foreign reserves growing largely as a result of their foreign trade. They are getting, and most of it is dollars, either dollar-denominated reserves, dollars themselves, or U.S. treasuries. The result of their foreign trade surplus, they then have to hold on to something, and mostly that's been gold. And you can see then the slope downward as they were selling off treasuries to support the yuan as the dollar was rising during that time period from the end of QE up until January 2017. You can see that they are now rebuilding their reserves here. You can see these lines here show the steep sell-off of their reserves. They basically went from 4 trillion down to 3 trillion during that time period. And during that time period, that's when they also slowed their pace of gold additions and then stopped their gold additions. Now that they're moving up, you may expect to see some additions to gold reserves as we go forward. Now, China is the largest holder of largest foreign holder of U.S. treasuries. They do hold over 1.1 trillion. They had sold off, as I mentioned, but you can see they've increased. Now, there was some talk last month about China dumping treasuries. They denied the report. We'll see what happens. I would imagine if they're going to continue to increase their reserves, then they will add more treasuries. They may not add them. In fact, the report was not that they were going to dump treasuries. The report was they were going to slow and or stop buying treasuries, which is different than selling treasuries. So that report was not confirmed by the Chinese government, but I would suspect there's some truth in it. I think what's going to happen is the Chinese will continue to increase their reserve position here, and they'll probably start to add back gold as well. I think part of their balancing of their reserves, they will continue to add treasuries, probably at a slower pace, but then they'll also add some gold. Now, Russia's done the same thing. Russia's been adding gold at a steady pace. They had sold off a lot of their treasuries a couple of years ago. They built them back up, and now it looks like they're keeping them in a general range of 100, 110 billion, whereas their gold reserves are rising from 60, 70, they're up to about 75 billion, just like the Chinese. Now, gold in China. Obviously, there's gold going into China, just not going to the People's Bank of China. Although gold imports through Hong Kong slowed, you can see this is 2017, just 597 tons compared to almost 800 tons in 2016, over 800 tons in 15, and over 800 tons in 2014, and 1,150 tons in 2013. However, China could also, this is only what's reported through Hong Kong. China does not report what comes into other ports, primarily Shanghai. They could be importing a certain amount that we're totally unaware of into Shanghai, although it would have to be coming from somewhere, and that somewhere is usually gets reflected through Swiss numbers, and I'm not sure what they have in Shanghai. People can speculate. I really can't, but I'm sure there is some gold that's not recorded in Chinese imports. It's not all in the Hong Kong imports. Now, gold mining production, I don't yet have. I have preliminary numbers, but I don't have the 2017 numbers. They were about the same. So if you take into account the amount of gold that China produces domestically and does not export, you can see that from this chart, just through 2016, they've imported and they've mined over 5,000 tons. And if you go back to their reserves, they don't have 5,000 tons of gold. Well, that definitely highlights that that gold, if it doesn't leave China, must be somewhere else in China, and it belongs largely to Chinese entities, I would imagine, and not individuals. So when you say China's gold, keep in mind that People's Bank of China's gold is not all of China's gold. Now, what else we got? Shanghai Gold Exchange. Tomorrow I will be giving you the report on the 2017 Shanghai Gold Exchange withdrawals. And you can see this is just through November. I do know that the gold exchange on the Shanghai Gold, the withdrawals on the Shanghai Gold Exchange were well over 2,000 tons. There were 2,030 tons, which made it the it's the fourth best year ever. So still a robust gold market in China via the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And we've had reports during the year that gold demand has been strong for bars, for jewelry, and actually better than last year. So China is still, along with India, a very robust, has very robust gold demand. We're going to also see with India gold demand was down last month. However, that is a result of actually a potential increase in gold demand because the government has been making noises about lowering or eliminating that 10% gold import duty. If they do that, gold demand will indeed increase. So some people, they say jewelers are holding back on buying gold now, and they're waiting to see if the government does indeed get rid of that gold import duty. If they do, you're going to see smuggling decrease. Obviously, there'd be no profit in it. And you will see, I would imagine, increased gold demand because basically the 10% duty will have been removed or perhaps just shaved down a bit. Now, let's just quickly talk about the myth of gold in China. A lot of people think, well, China has all this gold. They're immune from economic collapse. They're prepared for what's coming because they have gold. And I say, well, that's nonsense because the amount of debt that China has incurred is monstrous. It is more than all the rest of the world combined in the last 5 years. And there's no sign of slowing down. That's how they produce their GDP. They lend money. They have state-owned banks that lend money to state-owned enterprises who then go ahead with projects that aren't going to make any money, which means they can never pay the banks back. But the People's Bank of China says, don't worry about it. Lend them more money, extend the terms of the loan. In fact, loan them more money and see if they can produce more bridges and tunnels and trains and roads, things that, dams and things that are not needed, office buildings, skyscrapers, and so on. But what I point out is that if you take all the gold that's in China, not this 1,500 or 1,800 tons that the People's Bank of China lists on its balance sheet, and you say, okay, let's say they got 20,000 tons. That's a pretty, I'd say, middle of the road estimate. Some people say it's 25, maybe 30,000 tons. Some say it's about 10,000 tons. But let's just say it's 20,000 tons. Well, if they have 20,000 tons of gold and there's a debt crisis, that 20,000 tons of gold at the current prices, it's worth about $800 billion. It's not going to get them very far when they owe 28 trillion. They've got unfunded liabilities. This number is probably low too. They probably owe 40-50 trillion dollars. That number is growing. They have 1.2 billion people. They're going to need medical care. They're going to need Social Security when they retire. So they don't have enough in gold at current prices. Well, you say, well, China will just wave a magic wand and raise the price of gold. First of all, they have no incentive to do that. Their biggest incentive is to have a stable economy, not to be devalued. Although they could devalue the yuan by raising the price of gold. But even if they did, let's say they get it to $10,000 an ounce, so they have $6 trillion in gold. It's a nice cushion, but it's not going to prevent any type of debt Ponzi scheme collapse. In fact, it's not a cut against China. No country is immune from the debt Ponzi that they have created. United States is a well-known story, unfunded liability in the hundreds of trillions. You've got Japan, which just prints money, prints yen, and buys all their domestic Bank of Japan debt. You have the ECB printing money, Bank of England. The only bank that seems to be probably doing it right is the Swiss National Bank. They print money and they buy equities instead of debt. However, they could be buying, and they are buying, I know some of the stocks that they do buy some of the risky stocks too. So none of these sovereign entities have a way out of the debt crisis. It's just that a lot of people somehow believe that China has got this magic bullet because they have gold, and they also point to the United States as no magic bullet because it has no gold. Now, I don't know if the United States has no gold, but let's even assume they have no gold, or assume they have 8,000 tons. All this gold, even at $10,000, isn't going to even make a dent in the amount of debt of borrowing that these countries have issued over the past years. So I mean, you'd have to go to $100,000 and an ounce to start to say, and then you're talking about total chaos to revalue it. I mean, when the United States in 1933 to 1934, they confiscated the gold. They then devalued the dollar, rose the price of gold from up to $35, from $28. It was a 67% increase. They weren't talking about raising the gold price thousands and thousands of percentages. So that's probably not going to happen. I would think that more likely any type of debt collapse would be a debt collapse and almost a jubilee. I mean, gold would go up, but I don't think they would actually, before any collapse, try to raise the price of gold to give them some type of security, because then they just basically all have to be on a gold standard based on how much gold they had. And stranger things have happened, but I would doubt that the current banker thinking would even think that way. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this report, please consider buying gold or silver through the Small Gold links below this BitChute, below this YouTube, or on the Small Gold site. I get a small commission if you do buy. It's not an investment advice to buy gold or silver, but if you are going to, if you visited those links and you visit them through the site, you pay no more nor less than if you visited them directly, and you can compare pricing and shipping instead of just looking at one site, and you can make your purchases that way, or you can help the site out by donating to Small Gold via Bitcoin, Litecoin, or via PayPal, or even helping out by signing up to become a patron on Patreon. Thank you very much.